So Subzero Engineering are well known for containment solutions. I guess that's the main thing you're known for, but it'd be good just to have a little bit of background on the company to tell us the sort of things you do, as well as that, major string to your bow.
Sure. Back in 2005, early 2000s, Subzero really started as an airflow management company on like just the consultation side. And so CFDs were being used for commercial buildings and things like that. And Subzero was like, hey, why not do these for critical infrastructure? And so through the course of a few years of doing a lot of airflow consultation, doing CFDs, they realized that there were some pretty simple products that they could use to really benefit the customers. And so they started to make products to solve for the problems that they were finding with the CFDs. And then throughout time, the evolution of the product set, the evolution of the data center industry, we find ourselves where we're at today. And so that's kind of how we got there. But we weren't always a product company. And so we always really did start with data, start with consultation. And that DNA is still very much entrenched and ingrained in how we go about selling the physical products that we sell.
Okay, and in terms of the data center industry, which is obviously what we're here to chat about in this call, what do you see as the main challenges for the industry? But I guess that infers that, more importantly, your customers, the end users, people running data centers, because as a vendor, you'll be responding to their needs. So what are the main issues you see that your customers are interested in and or struggling with, maybe?
So to answer this one, I'll kind of break our customers up into a couple of sub-segments. So you have the hyperscalers who are focused on speed and availability of cloud space. It's really that simple. How fast can we build the space so that we have ample cloud available for all of these large customers that need more space based on applications and based on us, the consumer's actual need for data, need for entertainment, need for all of the things that the cloud represents and supports. Then we have the other thing on the other side, which is our regional colo space. And the biggest thing that they're struggling with is how do they maintain fiscal responsibility when trying to court middle market users who don't really know what they're doing, right? So you have a middle market colo that has about 10,000 square feet, and you have a local dentist office that needs 4 racks. They have to sell those 4 racks based on the way that the data center market is being commoditized over here. But how do they do it efficiently? How do they do it fast? And how do they do it to a point where they can actually make money off of it? And so those are the 2 challenges that we balance. We balance speed, and then we balance cost efficiency with the middle market.
Okay, and in terms of sort of industry issues, I'm wondering whether those customers come to you knocking on the door with concerns about sustainability, and then another sort of growing trend being talked about for a while and beginning to happen is sort of the 5G technology, but that is always linked with the edge. And I know we could probably have a separate conversation of how to define the edge, which would take quite a long time, but is that, again, one of the things that customers are inquiring about? They're looking at doing something around what they think is an edge, and you're being asked to help out.
So I think the edge is a good conversation. It may bring us down a rabbit hole that we may not be able to get out of, but we could go there, and I'm more than happy to do so. Sustainability, let's start there. Everyone is aware that they need to be sustainable. No one really knows what that means for them. Again, you have the Amazons, the Microsoft, the Facebooks, and the Googles, and they kind of understand, they understand that they have got to be sustainable based on their need to consume so many resources. So they go into a given area. Let's use Phoenix, Arizona for an example. Facebook has had to do and make all sorts of sustainability pledges so that the local municipalities are allowing them to even dig a hole in the ground to start, right? Water is a huge issue. How are you not going to consume all of these landowners' water? Why should we give you water rights? Why should we do all these things? So sustainability is a huge issue, especially in the American Southwest. When it comes to a little bit east, the sustainable issues are a little bit more driven around power, a little bit more driven around just land usage in general. And so, yes, our hyperscale customers are terribly aware of their environmental impacts, and they very much want to start with that conversation. How can you help us there? Middle market colos, not so much, but again, their impacts are quite a bit less. So it's more us educating them on how they can use what we can do to actually sell their space to their customers around the need for sustainability. And so we kind of we get it from the customer on one end, and we're giving it to the customer on the other. The edge, for example, you mentioned define the edge, and I think that's interesting because at Subzero, we're not real interested in defining the edge. We're interested in like growing with the edge and like taking the edge as it comes. Most consumers have no idea what the edge will look like. And I think that companies like Amazon and Netflix have really been living at the edge for a very long time based on the need for low latency and the need to drive customer satisfaction with a certain experience that can't be done from a centralized hub. It has to be done at the spoke, at the edge. So.
Okay, and bearing in mind that, as you sort of just explained briefly, the difficulty of pinning down an edge, maybe, you as a company have introduced the essential micro data center. So suggesting to me the name micro data center, that's at what I'd call a fairly local edge as opposed to more of a regional. But what were the challenges, I guess, in coming up with that concept, bearing in mind this sort of vague concept of what the edge might mean to any particular one of your customers?
So we've been doing edge applications for a number of years. Whenever we do edge applications, we always walk the sites and we're like, this is going to be terribly difficult to initiate or institute any type of proper containment solution. And that's because of the way that people were trying to support the edge. And I think that you've seen it's here's an edge in a box, here's an edge in a rack, here's an edge in a half of a rack, here's an edge in 4 racks, 6 racks, 8 racks, but it's all very, very finite. The space is finite, the use space is finite. And so where we really thrive with our containment solutions, the ability to be adaptable while also being somewhat predictable. So adaptability and predictability, we took our micro DC concept and said, let's be predictable so that our customers can build their infrastructure around that predictability, but let's also be adaptable so that if the edge happens to change or their edge changes, then we can adapt to it. Plus that allows them to not have to actually define what their edge is going to look like on day one. And we're almost in still like 500 BC of the edge, right? We still don't have widespread 5G. And if we do have widespread 5G, we do not have widespread applications that are running off of 5G. So we do not know exactly what we need from an infrastructure standpoint. So we found it pretty ridiculous to try to actually solve for something that we don't know what it's going to look like. So what we're doing is we're solving for what their edge looks like today, which is basically a smaller example of their enterprise data centers that are closer to the application that's being used. And so right now it's almost just about latency. Eventually it'll become more about autonomy and about the actual applications that are driving infrastructure changes at the edge, and we'll be ready to adapt to those.
Okay, so I'm guessing that maybe you've bumped into some customers that were reluctant to invest in what we'll call an edge data center solution because it was fairly inflexible. You either had to buy a standard container or a minimum amount of space, racks, whatever, and that wasn't what they wanted to do. And you've managed to give people a degree of flexibility, adaptability that hasn't been available until now. Is that correct?
So yeah, we can take the containerized solutions, for example, and you have a finite amount of kW. You also have a finite amount of real estate. And to change your edge presence, to change your edge footprint, you're just going to have to add another container. And to add another container, it's not terrible, but again, you get what you get at that container, and then you put it next to another one. And so you have all these containers in series. And so what that means is you have more points of complexity, more potential for failure, and then also your lead times are much greater because you're asking for this total solution to come be dropped next to your other total solution. Then you're having to get more and more power to do that one. And so people were reluctant, the customers that we've spoken with have been reluctant to say, my edge will be 10 racks and it will be 150 kW. They just don't know. And so because of that reluctance, what they're doing is they're kind of just not pushing any of their edge applications. They're not They're not saying, hey, folks, we're going to be using this application, which is really suited for the edge. They're going to hold off and they're going to wait and see what they can do as the infrastructure builds out a little bit better. And so there are some companies that are doing okay at the edge for sure. They're building out lots and lots of space so that customers have a little bit of adaptability there, but it's not really the availability that they can use to grow their edge presence. It's just a, hey, put your stuff here, and if it changes, we'll figure it out. Sometimes that's not great for a CFO or a CIO who needs longevity at the edge.
Okay, and if we can perhaps have a bit of a go at characterizing some of the applications. As I say, I think we're in agreement that the edge is a fairly difficult to define thing, or it means different thing to almost every different customer. But are you anticipating, I mean, the autonomous vehicle is the classic example, given there are going to be mini data centers on every street corner controlling cars, hopefully stopping them bumping into one another, etc. But I'm wondering, for most companies, that clearly isn't relevant. Are we talking about sort of on premises in a warehouse or even in a factory floor? I guess some of the content providers will be bringing content nearer to people, and so they can access it speedily. Yeah, can you just give us a flavor, I guess, of the sort of edge type applications you're seeing?
Yeah, autonomy in general is going to require tremendous amounts of edge space, right? Autonomy in general, whether it's trash robots, whether it's meter reader robots, whether it's actual autonomy driving, whether it's whatever the autonomy is, it will require a lack of latency that will require it to live at the edge. You mentioned warehousing, and so one of the things that we've all been doing that's been accelerated because of COVID is buying everything off the internet. All of the major retailers are really investing in their e-commerce platforms. They're starting to really build out their large scale warehousing. And so what we've been seeing is a couple of our edge applications sit in large scale warehousing, and they support autonomy within the warehouse space, but they also support high-powered like RFID tagging systems that allow these big enterprises to do real-time supply and demand analysis, and they can raise the prices or lower their prices based on all of the other e-retailers that are out there, and they can get more and more competitive, or they can maximize their margins based on the availability of the product that certain people within a certain geographic range are looking for. So for example, I wear a size 10.5 of this Nike shoe. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm looking for this shoe, but so are 14 other people. There's one 10.5 left. That shoe may now be $7 to $8 above MSRP because that company can charge that because their demand is high and there's only one left. Simple supply and demand, but using edge applications and edge data processing to maximize profitability. And so that's what's really driving these businesses' need for our type of application at the edge. Because what if grocery stores never exist anymore, and every single person in this 2 million person city are buying groceries offline? The ability for them to actually understand that they have or do not have inventory is going to be probably the most important thing to satisfying the customer base and them growing their customer base. And so those are the type of applications that I really see being utilized in the early onset of 5G applications, and really the early set of the edge, which is what we're seeing now.
Okay, and if it's not too much of an ask, bearing in mind you've given us some great insight into what edge is doing right now, do you have any idea on the time frame? You mentioned the sort of obviously the early type examples. I guess, are we still waiting for one of the major hyperscalers or a big telco to start building out massive 5G infrastructure, and then the edge will follow? What are your thoughts, I guess, as to how that landscape will mature over time?
So 2022 is going to be the year of the massive 5G infrastructure builds. Just because your iPhone says that it's receiving a 5G signal, that just means there's one frequency out there that your phone is recognizing, and we're calling it 5G because that's one of the frequency bands that's associated with that. That's a marketing ploy. That's not real. But next year, 2022, massive sweeping infrastructure projects are taking place. We have an understanding that there could be up to 200 to 300 builds that are going to be transitioning from old telephony equipment over into new 5G, more old school data center centric type environments that are really going to promote large scale 5G. And those will be the centralized hubs of 5G compute, and then that'll push out to the spoke. And that's where we're really going to start seeing applications start to show up at the edge, because the infrastructure will be there. I think a lot of application software companies can't really create or write software that can be used at the edge until the edge is usable, like real 5G speeds, 10,000 times 4G. Once they know what that means, then they can write programs that'll actually be able to utilize that speed and that efficiency. And once we see what those applications do, then we're all going to be able to start using them. And once we start using them, that's when real big enterprise consumers are going to start being able to build out their edge trajectories and their edge plans.
Okay, and if we can maybe focus in a little more on your essential micro data center solution.
Sure.
So perhaps you could talk us through, there's a sort of design and I guess construction phase. And then I think I'm right, it's a two-part solution. So you build out the room itself and then populate the infrastructure. And then I think, again, you're giving some flexible options around power and cooling. So perhaps can you just outline what's possible, where and when? Sure.
This is an interior application. This is not an exterior application. We have the luck of being our sister company being a modular clean room business. And so what we're able to do is take a modular clean room with a certain extrusion profile that allows for any type of insert up to 8 millimeters. We put an insulated metal panel in there, and then we can build out a room very quickly and very easily. We can flat pack it to site, we can ship it, and we can install it within 2 days. So there's our room, right? So now we have an actual physical separation between existing space and data center space. So there's one big distinguisher at the edge, right? Separation of spaces. So we can stick one in a warehouse and it'd be ready to go to support critical equipment. Then we also have a product that's a ground supported infrastructure conveyance product. It's called aisle frame. And we have a modular example of the aisle frame where we can go and it's stick built. We have universal couplings that attach to a certain extrusion profile that we can build out any size infrastructure, height, distance between bay links, so distance between columns that support the floor, any type of arm configuration above the racks. And so now we have a modular clean room or modular room that is environmentally controlled. And now we have all of the infrastructure. And then we have the ability through probably 30 or 40 partners across the country and even into Europe that all have infrastructure that support data centers. These are our resellers, our channel partners, our third-party installation crews that have all of these other things that they sell. And then we partner with them. And then based on the customer requirements, we can package an entire solution with racks, in-row cooling units, rear door heat exchangers, busway, rack PDUs. So any varied type of power and cooling infrastructure can just be put into the system and delivered on site. And so while we have a bunch of other large OEMs saying you must use our power, you must use our equipment, and you will be pigeonholed into using whatever it is that we can fit into this space, we can say, hey, Mr. Customer, what is it that you need? Oh, we have a partner that would be perfect for you. We actually have a company that we sell 100 kW rear door heat exchangers, passive or active. Let's put those in there. Let's increase the volume. Let's reduce the floor space. And then we build the room and build the infrastructure conveyance around the customer's need. And so we don't try to define anybody else's edge. We ask what they need. We ask questions and we create a solution that helps them understand where they're at, grow where they're at, but keeps their edge undefined for the future. Because again, what we just talked about, we don't even know what it's going to look like without applications.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, liquid cooling is, again, it's not a new technology, but it's beginning to become more interesting and maybe more used in, obviously, in the high performance or high density. Is that something that's relevant to the micro data center now or in the future?
Sure. Again, it's a pretty agnostic, insulated, environmentally controlled room. And so should you want to build one out 20 by 20 with a 12-foot ceiling height, and you can stick 4 tanks in there, you've got yourself an edge immersion cooling room that has the infrastructure overhead based on what we do with our aisle frame system, that we can run all of our power cabling overhead and do drops into the tanks and it can support that very easily and simply.
Okay, and in terms of we sort of referenced customers a bit earlier, but since the launch of this, what's been the feedback? I mean, were you doing some sort of testing with customers before you launched, and or as I say, since you've launched, what are you finding from the people you're talking to?
The customers love it. The biggest questions that we had at the beginning were, hey, can I make the room bigger in the future? Because I don't want it to be too big right now. The good answer is yes. All you have to do is take down some of our side panels, add up another column, and run a truss across, and now we've doubled the size of the room. And so that was one thing that we really wanted to design the room around, is the ability to grow the room quickly and easily and fast. And so the modularity around it has been very important to our customers. Some of them aren't ever going to make them bigger, right? Like they want to know if they can. They'll never do it. It's just the way it is. It's kind of like, I'm going to buy this big house because maybe we'll have an extra kid. You never have the kid. Or maybe you buy the small house. We're never going to have the kid. Then you have 3. And so our ability to just give customers a sense of security because they don't know all the answers now is really what's been helpful to them. They've really enjoyed the flexibility of configuration. We've got, square rooms, rectangle rooms, L-shaped rooms. We can do it all, and that's really helped them maximize their interior footprint. And so square footage is harder and harder to come by in really populated areas. Price per square foot is very expensive. And so what they're doing is they're maximizing their operational footprint, and it leaves these really odd shaped empty floor spaces that we're able to actually utilize for data infrastructure. And instead of sticking it out in the parking lot, and because it's an interior application and we have the ability to kind of stick in those weird shaped floor spaces, we can save the customer on average around 30%. I mean, an interior room is cheaper than an exterior room that needs to be weatherproof and stormproof and flash and all of those different things. And it really cuts down on permitting time and infrastructure costs. And so we're getting a lot of traction just around what the solution can do.
Okay, it just occurred to me, in a warehouse environment, warehouse is one of their distinguishing features. They're often very, very tall indeed. So there's a lot of space. Is it possible to build up as well as out, whether it's with that solution, or do you do sort of mezzanines and stuff like that? I'm just curious as to whether that is a possibility.
No, it's a great question. We've partnered with a fiberglass reinforced polymer company. Fiberglass reinforced polymer has an embedded carbon footprint that's significantly less than steel. And so it's sustainable. It's 80% lighter so that we can, again, be stick built, walk into an existing building, not have to worry about knocking down walls. We can go through walk doors with them. We can build mezzanine structures. We can do walkable roofs. We can do 2-story data centers because of what the FRP can give us. It's very light and easy to use, and again, sustainable. So yes, the answer is we can do that fairly easily.
Okay, and if it's not unfair, finally, we've talked, I say, about quite a lot of issues with a major focus, I guess, on the edge. But for someone who is running a data center or a set of data centers, if you like, have you got any 1 or 2 sort of bits of advice or thoughts? Because, as I say, digitalization accelerated by the pandemic. There's an awful lot going on, and as we've alluded to, sort of flexibility, agility is quite important. But I'm thinking some data center operator, someone's kind of tearing his hair out thinking, where do I go? What do I do? Any sort of general bits of advice you can give to folk as they look at what they can, how they can optimize their data center infrastructure?
Sure. The first thing I would say is look at the details, look at the small things, right? Data centers are these microcosms of all of these different structures that are working together to do something. And typically what you think is the problem is never really the problem. And so what I would do is I would step back, detach a little bit, and try to get a bigger picture of the whole thing, whether it's through monitoring, through a consultation, or through just asking questions to vendors about certain things that have been in more data centers than you. Because typically, you being out of power is not because you don't have enough power. You're just using your power for the wrong things. You having hot spots is typically not because you don't have enough cooling. It's because you can't get enough heat out of that space, right, to allow for cooling to come into it. And so I would really just detach and look at the periphery of the problem and not the problem itself. And typically you can solve the issue for a lot less money and a lot faster by not focusing on the problem, but focusing on what's causing the problem. And to do that, again, just monitoring data, understanding, and getting with somebody who can actually tell you what the data means.
Okay, and on that point, would I be right in thinking that anyone who's trying to, improve, optimize their data center environment and doesn't engage with sort of CFD type analysis is basically missing a trick? It's very difficult to optimize without, you've alluded to, but obviously the technology to do that is normally some kind of CFD analysis.
Sure. So we have two different CFD flavors. One is free, and it's a conceptual CFD based off of the data center proprietor filling out 25 or 30 questions, and we give them a conceptual CFD that says, here's what we think is going on in your data center based on what you've told us. Here's where we think we can help, and here's what we think that help will do for you, right? Typically, that's about 85 to 90% accurate on average. And then we have a paid CFD where we go on site, we take all the measurements, we do all the data inputting into our systems, and those are 100% accurate. And then we do a little bit more in-depth development around what we could do for you to solve certain problems. But yes, you're correct. If you don't understand the airflow and thermodynamics of your data center, and you don't know what's going on at the rack level, at the row level, at the room level, at the crack unit, at your chiller, at your pumps, then chances are you're not starting in the right place.
Okay, well, it's been great to talk to you, Sam, and some brilliant insights you've given us. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.